Hello, my friends. This is part two in a two-part series on updates to the Ukraine war that I'm making on June 25th, as today, 2023. And I'm going to review previous predictions to see what we've said in the past, how it worked out. Now, looking back with hindsight, we can put it into perspective better. So let's go through those first 10 videos quickly. The first video I made was 7 days after the war began. Began on February 24th. Oops, I got a typo here. 2022. That should be March 3rd, 2022. I made the first video, 1 week after it began. I said Putin is emotionally attached to Ukraine. And I was totally shocked and surprised by this. That Putin was not a bully just taking over every vulnerable place that he could look at and having visions of grandeur. It's actually an emotional thing that he feels that Ukraine really is part of Russia. You might think that's delusional, crazy, whatever, but I said that 1 week after the war began. It's almost prophetic because we see how the realization of that is gradually dawning on people. Number two, Putin sees, and by the way, this was just based on astrology. I had no knowledge of the history or anything. I'm not, historian, whatever. This is what the astrology told me. And in those other videos, I explain how the astrology told me this. Number two, Putin sees the West is, to quote from my first video that I made on March 7, 2022, violating the deep spiritual depth of Russia. This worldview that is out of touch with people. So this worldview that he has is so out of touch with like, for example, people in the United States. They can't imagine how the West, the United States and NATO is violating the deep spiritual depth of Russia. But I'm saying this is what Putin thinks, whether it makes sense to you or not. He has his own internal reality. It's very surprising. So my whole view of what's motivating the war, what's going on, is very different from what we've been told and what I thought before I looked at the astrology. This is all from the astrology, not my beliefs or analysis outside of astrology. Number three, Russia does want to break free from restriction and claim their greatness. That's true. They want to reclaim their greatness. It's not the biggest thing, but it is part of it. And number four, the situation is more complicated than it seems. The United States in the past has used the term regime change. This is a huge mistake. We need to let people determine their own way from their own heritage as long as it does not harm others. Because they see us Americans as interfering with their lives. We have to remember, they see us as interfering with their lives. The more you mention something like regime change, wow, you've just proven it to them. So we can elevate opposing countries by working with them within the context of their cultures. That's the big lesson we need to learn. We're not going to Americanize them. We can share what we have to offer and work with them in the context of their lives. That's the strategy that will work. And then I made a 4-part series on the Ukraine war on April 16th, 2022. This is almost 2 months after the war began. And that's where I show the graph of pro-American and anti-American sentiment. And I show that this graph worked for World War II. Anti-American sentiment peaks during World War II. It peaked on 9/11 when the Twin Towers were attacked in New York City, 9/11/2001. And it matches the invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. Vibrational astrology is an evidence-based practice. We graph things. We put it down on numbers. It's so easy to fool yourself with your own personal interpretation. We graph it. We see, does it fit? Does the model work? So it's a whole different way of doing astrology. Graph it, model it, see if it works. And this graph that works for those three events peaks in September, October 2022. And to quote from the video I made on April 16th, 2022, Russia is likely to claim parts of eastern Ukraine as part of Russia in September and October and reassert its position in late February to early March 2023. It's exactly what they did. They claimed eastern Ukraine as part of Russia at the end of September, right in the middle of that time period that I predicted. And so specific predictions coming true. Number two, pro-American sentiment was very strong, 1942 to 1945. So I have a graph of pro-American sentiment. We build the model. We see if the model works. And that's when the West became the heroes, especially the United States, and defeated the Nazis. So we see these graphs correlating very well with these political movements. And in March 2022, pro-Western sentiment was strong, as there is joy that Ukraine pushes Russia back right after the war began. We saw that earlier in part one of this two-part series. Then I make a video, the sixth video I made September 30th, 2022, the day before Ukraine annexes East Ukraine. This was, they announced that they were going to annex it, and they annexed it exactly when I predicted. It's a defining point in the world, a defining point in the war. And then I looked at the exact moment, the time when it's officially declared that this vote and everything was over, and you look at that chart and it reinforces, when we analyze it, that the momentum that the war started with had reached a culmination at this point and was strengthened. So the forecast was not perfect. Putin advances but never gets the upper hand in the war. I expected that that Russia would clearly gain the upper hand in September, October. They don't. They annex the eastern region, and they stabilize themselves, but they're not able to advance very much. And that's because Russia never advanced very much after the war began. I didn't know that they would get stuck there. I thought maybe they would move a lot forward and backward. But they maintained their place. And they annex eastern Ukraine. And then we start hearing statements from Putin about how he sees the war. And with statements like this, he may have made them earlier, but not being an expert on this stuff, I watch and see what happens. And he says it becomes more public news that we see, on like a evening news that I might watch. Putin states that Russia was directly threatened with disintegration by the Western powers backing the Kiev government. This is the first time I see news of Putin explaining exactly what I perceived is happening, and exactly what I stated 1 week after the war began. These kinds of statements by Putin are interpreted as lies by the news media. So I'm watching the news and they're saying he's making this stuff up about the West is trying to disintegrate them, whatever. It's like crazy. He's blaming, making stuff up. No, he actually believes this. This is the thing that the West never understands. They think he's lying. Maybe he's lying to himself, whatever, but he is not consciously lying to other people. He's telling you what he thinks, believe it or not. And that's becoming more obvious all the time. The seventh video I made was on November 13th, 2022, when I start hearing news from people like Russell Brand, Tulsi Gabbard, and others, that they're saying the West is contributing to the war. Whoa! The first time we see some erosion in the confidence, almost 100% support that Putin is just a bully, Ukraine's defending themselves. We start hearing news about Ukraine being the second most corrupt country in that part of the world, Russia being the first, and how the NATO had infringed more different points of view. It's still unpopular, but we're starting to hear the first noises that this is more complicated, which is what I said from the beginning. This was not so much a bully just overpowering a vulnerable country nearby. That's part of the story, but the bigger part of the story is that he thinks Ukraine is part of Russia. He actually believes this, and he believes that he's been forced into this. And now people in the West, and Russell Brand has a huge following, Tulsi Gabbard is very well known, so we see another point of view creeping in. So what I said 1 week after the war, based purely on astrology, starts becoming not so strange and bizarre in what I was saying, which sounded strange and bizarre, at least to me, when I saw it astrologically. But I went with the astrology. Astrology knows more than I do. And then on November 11th, Ukraine has its big breakthrough, big celebrations by Ukrainians in Kherson. I don't know if you remember this, but Kherson was taken by the Russians, came back to Ukraine huge celebrations, and the timing fits exactly with the predictions from the graph and the prediction that even though everybody was celebrating, this is not the first light towards Ukraine taking over. There's going to be advances and retreats in fairly stable line. So yes, there's all these celebrations, but where are we today? Not very different from where we were then. So then on January 28th, I made the 8th video, The Bitter Truth, where I emphasize that Ukraine cannot win this war without extreme obliteration of Russia. Nothing else will work, and that's starting to become more obvious to people. Then the 9th video in December that I made, on March 10, 2023. That's the one I made almost a little more than 3 months ago. I predicted that Russia is likely to take Bakhmut on March 13th. That didn't happen, but I'm going to show you some graphs that show you that the essential concept was correct. Zelensky still says no compromise, which is not going to work. And I show how the astrological features are, how they work, and how we make the forecast. And then the 10th video was 2 weeks later on March 27th, where I say, oops, I was wrong. The prediction that Russia would control Bakhmut was wrong. I said my forecasts are suddenly not looking so great. Instead of nearly 100%, they're only 70 to 75%. Well, I'm wrong again in that my forecast was more accurate than I thought. And I'm going to show you the graphs that show that the forecast was actually more accurate than it seemed, because the news media was saying that the Wagner group gave up. They were going to just focus on something in Africa, and Ukraine's about to take over Bakhmut again, and Russian offensive is falling apart. I believe this. Actually not that simple, and the Wagner group didn't leave, etc. So we're going to now, in hindsight, look back and see that the forecast was actually mostly correct. Also, during that time period, China is friendly to Russia. India is buying Russian oil. So this actually was a strong time for Russia. And I make predictions that Ukraine will advance in June and July, and we're already seeing that starting to happen in late June. Now, let me show you these slides that show you that the forecast that was made for March was more accurate than it seemed at the time. I want to credit Game Weather Time Lapse is the the people that make this YouTube video, in a video called Bakhmut Frontline Map, January to May 2023, and I give the URL. I just want to give full credit for these maps that I found. I just stopped the video a few times to show this. This red area, you see the dividing line, shows the area controlled by Russia at the beginning of 2023 on January 2nd. That's the Russian-controlled area. In February and March, we're expecting Russia to make huge advances. February, whoops, went the wrong way. Okay, here it is in January. February, did you see that? Let me go back to January. February, boom, that northern part, they make progress. We're expecting progress in late February. March, does this red, the controlled area by Russia, does it move farther west? By March 1st, wham, it moves all the way around. Bakhmut is completely surrounded. So February and March, Russia makes some significant advances. By April, we expect a little more advancing. There it is. Now we're past the February-March time period, and probably Russia's going to have more difficulty advancing, and there's almost no change. Here's April, May. One little tiny part of eastern Bakhmut goes to Russia. Let me go back in. April, May, almost no change. And this last one is for May 15th, and we see some slight advancement from the Ukraine. And probably through June and July, we're probably going to see some more advancement by Ukraine. Mild, not as much as people might hope for. This is to show you that what I predicted actually was not so far off. And furthermore, what's really critically important is that Bakhmut got completely leveled. There's almost nothing left. So the news media said that the Wagner group was leaving Bakhmut. The arguments between the Wagner Group and Putin were so bad, Russia's defense would collapse, etc. That didn't happen. And the reality is Bakhmut has been 99% destroyed. The city is leveled. It's one of the most horrific disasters in modern times. A few Ukrainians would not leave the Bakhmut area, so Russia destroyed almost all of the buildings. A complete and utter disaster. You could even argue it might have been better if Ukraine would have given up so that there would be less destruction of people's lives and the city. So Ukraine just held on to would not give up. But Russia kept pushing forward. And this is what really upset Prigozhin, the head of Wagner Group, that he saw that window of opportunity. Other recent news is, I'll just go over a few things that confirm the forecasts. The Kharkova Dam was destroyed on June 6th. Russia blamed Ukraine. Evidence suggests that Russia is responsible. The damage to farming and the ecology is massive. My prediction has always been that when things get desperate for Russia, they will use everything possible. I said this over a year ago. And they will use nuclear bombs if they're pushed to it. Not before, but if pushed to it. So probably Russia did destroy the dam. Are we surprised? No. Get ready for more disasters. So these predictions are coming true, that if they're not able to make progress, if they can't control enough of that eastern region, they will go to extremes. So I don't know why people are surprised by that, but that's to be expected. More recent news, a few days ago, June 22nd, 2023, Zelensky banned the commercial import of books from Russia in his latest move to reduce cultural ties between the two countries. So this war is about Putin's attempt to preserve Ukraine as part of Mother Russia and Zelensky's desire to break free from Russia. Zelensky's action is expected. The war is not about Russia wanting to take over any country considered to be vulnerable. It's targeting Ukraine, which it considers to be part of Mother Russia, and Zelensky's trying to be free of that. That's essentially what's going on. And so these are just confirming these events as they develop, confirming my understanding and interpretation, not mine, what the vibrational astrology indicates. Number 3, President Joe Biden has warned that the threat that the Russian President Vladimir Putin could use tactical nuclear weapons is real. So suddenly, in late June, Biden says this is not just a bluff, which is what I had heard on the news previously. He could actually use nuclear weapons. So Biden's advisors apparently are beginning to understand what's happening. This is what I've said all along. So we're seeing little hints, little information, changes in perspective coming around to what the astrology told us from the very beginning. Number 4, in May 2023, Putin's looking at a map showing that the country Ukraine did not exist in the 1700s. He's discussing with this historian, an expert in maps and whatever, that, look, here's the history. They really are part of Russia. Is this amazing or what? This is what I said 1 week after the war began. He thinks that Ukraine is part of Russia. In the Western media, when I watch CNN and Fox News and other popular media things, they say, well, this is absurd. He's just making things up. He's going back to old maps. And they're saying it says Ukraine right on the map. No surprise. We're just finding out what I've been saying all along. And the people who think that he's bluffing and making things up, no, this is just what he thinks. You may think it's strange that he thinks this, but he actually believes this. And that, if you're going to defeat the enemy, you need to know the enemy. We haven't gotten that. So I'm just showing how recent developments, recent news items are confirming what I've been saying all along based on the astrology. Number 5, in May 2023, articles appeared discussing the possibility that a Korean border-style armistice may be the likely outcome. And I give a link to an article in the nationalinterest.org on how people are talking about, you know what, this war may just go on forever. We may end up with a similar situation we have with North Korea and South Korea, where there's kind of this armistice, this truce, and says, okay, you're there. Let's just have this area between the countries where there's no fighting, and let's just live with it. People are now starting to talk about what I said immediately after the war, that this is the likely outcome. And now it's slowly starting to become accepted. Still not accepted by most people over a year later. I'm predicting that in November, this idea of living with this situation will become more acceptable to more politicians and more people. Zelensky appears to be very far from realizing that this is the likely way it'll end. Do I know it will end this way? No. I'm just saying this is the likely outcome based on looking at what these 7 vibrations and 13 vibrations, how they behave, how they interact, and how things have developed. So Ukraine, I predict, will make strong advances in the summer. Russia will send missiles into cities and use dirty bombs and even nuclear bombs if necessary. It's interesting that the West let Russia take Crimea without much retaliation, but is not tolerating this more mainland thing. Anyway, just an observation. Number 7, as I already mentioned, more people become tired of the war around September through December, and there will be attempts to compromise. Donald Trump is very likely to get involved in that attempts to reach some kind of compromise. And then people start questioning previous strategies and why did we think anything else would happen. But will an actual negotiation and truce be reached? Seems like it partially. And how partial, I'm not sure. Maybe fairly weak. Be great if it was strong, because if it isn't, it's just going to go on and on and on anyway. Now, I want to mention that one of the reasons I do these predictions on big events like this is because it's good for determining if vibrational astrology is developed enough to be useful for complex situations. We know that vibrational astrology is evidence-based. We have data. We have data that shows repeatedly people with bipolar disorder, people who are musicians, people who are athletes, there are planetary configurations at the time they're born that are less likely with other people. This is amazing. Astrologers are more hesitant to admit this incredible progress than almost anybody else, but it's happening. Do we understand things well enough to apply them in a complex situation? Have we gotten these variables close enough? Well, we're finding out. By making these forecasts, we're finding out if we understand this well enough to apply it in complex situations. So far, in the predictions for Ukraine war, I think the answer is yes. We're seeing some valuable insights and information. If we combine this with experts in the military, experts in history, experts in foreign affairs, experts in these different cultures, wow, we could bring all this together and come up with much better solutions. Just by myself, just looking at the astrology without all this expertise, we already can see huge improvements over what the politicians have and the military have decided. And as research replicates previous findings, as new research gets bigger effect sizes, vibrational astrology is moving into academic, business, and political worlds. And this use of vibrational astrology in complex situations doesn't verify the theories as rigorously as the studies on specific behaviors, but it's part of the evidence-based practice to see if we can extend this knowledge and into various applications and get good results. And the evidence appears to be yes. And going out on a limb to say specific things ahead of time to see how well that works. So like an archaeologist who recreates an animal from the shape of an animal, what that animal is like from 1 or 2 bones, I have formulated the nature of the Ukrainian war and its likely development from one little tiny piece of evidence, the starting time of the war. So not really expecting to have consistent, nearly 100% accuracy from that little bit of evidence, and then other things that happened, such as the time that Ukraine annexed when Russia said that they now annexed eastern Ukraine, etc. and seeing these other critical dates, I think we've gotten an insight into what's really going on, what the real motivations are, where things are really going. So this is very exciting. Governments and businesses that are early adopters and using this new technology, a whole new concept, and evidence-based astrology, and astrology based on actual data, confirmed and developed, not just from personal experience and tradition, they are having a big advantage. So there's a paradigm shift, a new revolution in understanding, and the early adopters of this are having a head start on other people to understand what's going on. So we're seeing this particularly with business people utilizing this to understand better the context and the details of every part of their business. We haven't gotten any interest yet from government sources or military sources for it, but the technology is available when they are ready to take advantage of this new technology that uses the highest rigorous academic standards. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you. This video is for members only. Thank you for being a member. Thank you, thank you, thank you. God bless. Namaste.